The Iranian Islamic Revolution of 1979 was a historic event that profoundly changed the political landscape of the Middle East. It led to the downfall of the Pahlavi monarchy and the establishment of an Islamic republic under the leadership of Khomeini. As Iran's longtime ally, the United States, under the leadership of the Carter administration, attempted to safeguard its interests during the crisis while upholding its human rights diplomacy. However, the Carter administration's policy appeared indecisive amid the complex situation of the revolution, failing to rescue the Pahlavi regime and unable to effectively respond to the rise of Khomeini, ultimately resulting in a major setback to U.S. influence in the Middle East. The Carter administration initially regarded the Pahlavi regime as a pillar of strategic stability in the region. Iran was not only an important oil supplier but also a frontline outpost in the Cold War against the Soviet Union. After coming to power, Carter's human rights policy put pressure on Pahlavi's authoritarian rule. In 1977, Carter visited Iran, publicly expressing support for Pahlavi, but privately urged him, through Ambassador William Sullivan, to implement political reforms, release political prisoners, and ease press censorship. These reforms were intended to ease domestic discontent, but they backfired. The opposition saw Pahlavi's limited concessions as a sign of weakness, triggering even larger-scale protests. In 1978, the protests in Iran escalated rapidly. From clerics to students to ordinary citizens, economic hardship and dissatisfaction with Pahlavi's westernization policies ignited nationwide anger. The Carter administration faced a dilemma, whether to continue supporting Pahlavi or to engage with the opposition. During the Black Friday incident in September 1978, military suppression resulted in the deaths of dozens of protesters, after which the U.S. publicly called for restraint from Pahlavi. However, American intelligence agencies gravely underestimated Khomeini's influence, mistakenly believing that the revolution would not lead to a regime change. While the Carter administration did not engage Khomeini directly, it pinned its hopes on moderate factions, such as the National Front, to form a transitional government and stabilize the situation. As the protests paralyzed Iran, the Pahlavi regime was already on the brink of collapse by the end of 1978. The Carter administration sent envoys to assess the situation and advised Pahlavi to gradually withdraw from power and form a civilian government. In January 1979, Pahlavi appointed moderate Shapur Bekshir as prime minister, but Khomeini refused to compromise and called for the complete overthrow of the regime. That same month, under immense domestic pressure, Pahlavi left Iran, nominally for a vacation, but in reality into exile. While the U.S. did not directly arrange his departure, it facilitated his exit diplomatically by contacting Egypt and other host countries. Pahlavi's departure marked the end of the monarchy. On February 1, 1979, Khomeini returned from Paris to Tehran, welcomed by millions of supporters, and swiftly took control, establishing the Islamic Republic. At this point, the Carter administration tried to engage with the new regime, communicating with interim Prime Minister Mehdi Bazargan through the U.S. Embassy in an effort to maintain diplomatic and economic relations. However, the U.S. underestimated Khomeini's staunch anti-American stance and failed to foresee the religious radicalization of the revolution. In October 1979, the Carter administration allowed Pahlavi to enter the U.S. for cancer treatment. This decision enraged Iran's revolutionary factions and directly triggered the hostage crisis on November 4, when the U.S. Embassy was stormed and 52 Americans were held hostage for 444 days. Carter later admitted that this decision was one of his foreign policy mistakes. The Carter administration's policy during the Iranian Revolution reflected its struggle between idealism and realism. The pressure of human rights diplomacy, intelligence failures, and misjudgments in geopolitical strategy led the U.S. to fail in supporting Pahlavi at a critical moment and to adapt to the new reality under Khomeini. In his exile memoir Answer to History, Pahlavi expressed his dissatisfaction with the United States, blaming the Carter administration's indecision for his downfall. However, the roots of the revolution lay more in Iran's deep internal contradictions than in external interference alone. The Carter administration's actions were neither a deliberate attempt to overthrow an ally nor a conscious effort to support Khomeini, but rather the result of being swept up in an uncontrollable tide of history. More than 40 years have passed, and Iran's brand of militant political Islam has not only fundamentally transformed the country's social structure and political system but also had a profound impact on the entire Middle East and the global geopolitical order. The theocratic regime has kept Iran in a prolonged state of confrontation with the West, frequently involving the country in regional conflicts and sustaining support for various militant organizations, actions that have triggered widespread international controversy. The Iranian nuclear issue has become a focal point of global security concerns. Domestically, restrictions on free speech and thought, the suppression of dissent, and the hardships brought by economic sanctions have left Iranian society caught in a persistent struggle between conservatism and the desire for change. Looking back at 1979, the revolution did not merely overthrow a monarchy, it marked the beginning of a new era of volatility, the consequences of which continue to unfold today. Reflecting on the 1979 Iranian Revolution, the U.S. response remains a textbook case of strategic indecision and the tension between moral ideals and realpolitik in foreign policy. The Carter administration sought to pursue a values-based diplomacy by pressing authoritarian allies to reform, yet it failed to make clear and timely decisions as the crisis unfolded. At the height of the revolution, Washington neither firmly supported the Pahlavi regime nor fully understood the deeper ideological structure and long-term ambitions of Khomeini's movement. The result was not only the loss of a key regional ally, but also the emergence of a global perception that the United States had abandoned its partners. This failure was not born of malice, but rather from a vacillation between idealism and pragmatism. As similar dilemmas arise in other regions today, the lessons of 1979 remain stark. In times of upheaval and transition, foreign policy must strike a balance between principle and clarity of strategy, or risk paralysis and long-term consequences. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked this episode, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more, share it with friends, and drop a comment below. This is The Sharp Angle. See you next time. Bye-bye.